All right, let's record. That would be good. Let's put on glasses because those help. Because, like we said, the effects of the fall are real. And let's hope for a new heaven and a new earth where you're not ordering like 7 sets of these on Amazon and just put them all over the house, right? Because you know you're going to need them at some time. Does anyone else do that, or is that just me? Right?
Not just you.
Okay, you don't just have your one set of reading glasses. It's like, okay, where can I strategically place these? Yeah, like I have them in my son's room now because he wants me to read at night. And I'm like, God, where are the glasses, kid?
Or you could be like me and just put them on and leave them all day.
Nope, see, I can't because I have my regular glasses that I use just for normal stuff, but that's not going to help me for the reading. So I'm the switcheroo guy.
Oh, I'm the one that has 3 levels in her glasses, but there's no lines.
Really,
I can't. Explains a whole lot.
Yeah, right. Yeah, there's 3 levels going up there.
Yeah.
See, you know, I tried that. I'm one of those total OCD guys who, if I get the tiniest smudge on my glass, I can't handle it. And so I tried the progressives, and it was just it wasn't clear. It always felt smudgy. So I don't know. I couldn't
Then
do
your
that.
prescription might have been wrong.
That's true.
Because
That's true.
I read out of here, my computer is out of here, and I
Really?
look up here. And I get a wide lens, and
Okay.
I ask for the wider area so I don't have to turn my head. to
That's
see.
probably what it is. Because when I had my progressives, I had the same thing. I was like constantly feeling like I was in a fish.
Yeah, okay, interesting.
Yeah.
Look at
Yeah,
this.
I actually get the wider
The Hembolts too.
part of the reader stuff.
This is turning into a optometry support group.
No, I just didn't want to lose glasses all the time.
Just keep 6 pair handy.
Yeah, I'm going with the 6 pairs.
Mike has
You know,
7.
that's the Wednesday night call. Sorry, that bled over to the Tuesday night.
Yeah, right. We're blending support groups. That's hilarious. Where'd that go? There it goes.
19-1.
We got this. We got.
We're still in 18, aren't we?
We're in chapter 19. We did 17 and 18 last week, didn't we?
We did, didn't
We
we?
finished
Yeah.
right there. 19-1.
Oh, I put a mark in the chapter. Never mind.
Knowing me, I could have screwed that up and maybe we just skipped a chapter, but
It wasn't you. It was,
it's not you, it's me. That's what the girls used to tell me in high school. It's not you, it's me. Not me. It was, you know, the girl would say, "It's not you, it's me," and what they meant is, "It's you, it's not me." So, it always works. Okay, let's see how far we could get here. So, chapter 19. So let's remind ourselves where we just came from. So we just had chapter 17, which we called the high priestly prayer, as it's often been known. This is Jesus's final goodbye speech to his people. Remember, his followers are here now. It's not merely people trying to figure out if he's developing a sign or not. Who is this guy? You pretty much have his people here, and he's doing that famous Jewish thing where he's giving a farewell speech, and he's giving them a glimpse into him and the Father, and you know, it's interesting. I'll as an aside, real quick. What's today? Tuesday. So Sunday night in our small group, we were meditating on Psalm 104. Is it 104? Let's see. Yeah. Bless the Lord, O my soul, O Lord my God, you are very great. And we went through all of Psalm 104, but one of the guys in the group asked the question, what does it mean to bless the Lord? And as we were going through, first off, the text in Psalm 104, it seems like blessing the Lord has to do with righteousness happening. It's this God who set forth the foundations of the world, and he makes springs gush forth in the valleys, and he causes grass to grow. All this creation imagery in which he's making things right. Remember, righteousness, we use that word a lot in Christianese. Righteousness is the things the way things ought to be. It's the way things are supposed to be is when you have righteousness. And so we usually in the Protestant tradition only speak of righteousness in terms of an individual sin type idea, which is true. But in the Jewish mindset, the righteousness of God was God making things right. And justification, which we once again love that concept in the Protestant world. But justification from a Jewish standpoint is it's justify and righteousness are actually the same word in Greek. It's just which is in English are two completely different words. It's just if it's a noun, you translate it as righteousness. If it's a verb, you translate it as justify. Okay. And so to justify it means it's the act of putting something in the right. So both justification and righteousness are very much connected. And while it's very true that we need to be justified of our sin as individual sinners, we also don't want to think so uniquely Western American individualized where like that's the whole point of the Bible, not just that individuals are made right with God. It's that God puts things in the right. And so even something like a Psalm 104, it's demonstrating the way what righteousness is, how God created creation, and this is the way it's ought to be. And guess what? He does things where, and now I'm reading in a different translation now than I had the other night. Gosh, where was it? Or was it 103? Oh, you know what's funny? Both 104 and 103 start the same way. It was 103. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and all that is within me. So very similar startings. And so here it's the Lord works righteousness and justice for all who are oppressed. The Lord is merciful and gracious. He does not deal with us according to our iniquities, our sins, but nor does he repay us according to our iniquities. He's a father who shows compassion to his children. And even what I was reading in 104, it's the same idea that this is what it looks like to be in the right. For righteousness to happen, it looks like all of these things. And so you see this in chapter 17, and this is why I'm getting to the comment I made on Psalm 103. Someone asked the question, what does it look like to bless the Lord? And look at the way he demonstrates how he blesses us in Psalm 103. It's by even being a father to people and providing righteousness for those who have been, for God's people who have been mistreated. And that's a way of blessing God is when God's people do the same thing. And so it immediately made me think of last week when we were going through John 17, where what's the ultimate goal of the Son coming into the world? He says, glorify me with the glory I had once with you, and let me demonstrate to the world that we are one. And then what does Jesus go on to say? And guess what? I allow them to be one, just as we are one, and then we could all be one together. And so when that question came up, what does it mean to bless the Lord? Bless the Lord, O my soul. Bless Yahweh, O my soul. And not just soul, like individual parts. And this guy's translation translated as, bless the Lord with my entire being, which is a great translation. Because soul just doesn't mean like the immaterial. It's all of me. And so it made me think of John 17 and, hey, what does it mean to bless God? When God's people have unity. And when God's people have unity with him, that's a way of blessing God because we are accomplishing what he envisioned for us to be and for us to do. This is what I think Paul writes about in Romans 12 when he talks about let our lives be a living sacrifice, right? And what does it mean to be a living sacrifice? Oh, it means you weep with those who weep and rejoice with those who rejoice. It means loving the people of God, and it means even not hating your enemy, which is contrary to how the world works. But these are the ways in which I believe we bless God. And we also bless God by having allegiance to Jesus and being people who are having eternal life, as the Gospel of John would say, which other gospel writers would say are involved in the kingdom of God. These are all ways in which we bless God in a sense. So it's interesting to think because, man, what does God need my blessing for? In a sense, it's true. It's like, every Friday is art day at school. So my first grader comes home with some, I don't want to say it too loud. He comes home with some art piece. Do we need that hanging on the wall? Like, do I need that art? But there's that sense of, man, you get that little thing. And how does that bless you? When you get that construction paper crayon piece of paper that's stapled together and glued, it's a blessing to me, even though it's like, I'm not going to sell it for anything, but it's a blessing. I think we see the same thing with God. So we see that in chapter 17 in terms of this high priestly prayer. And what's the point? It's to be one, just as they are one. And this goes back to chapter 13. And guess what? The world's going to know we're followers of Jesus by how we love one another. So 17 was great, except for, hey, watch out. You're going to experience persecution. So God, keep them through that. Chapter 18 turns gnarly. Chapter 18 is the betrayal. It's the arrest of Jesus. We see that even in the garden, the religious leaders and the Roman police, they're coming together at night because they're in the dark, and they think they have lights. They're coming with lamps, but they're still in the dark. We have the Peter denying Jesus. We have his illegal trial that happens at night that should have happened during the daytime. And then it comes to the very end where they chose Barabbas. And if you remember, Barabbas, that's not a name. You know what also isn't a name? Adam and Eve. You know that? In Hebrew, Adam just means man and Eve means woman in Hebrew. So those are not proper nouns. It's like saying man and woman. So it's interesting. Here even, it's give us a son of a man, Barabbas, Bar Abba, which is ironic because they have the son of man with them, and they're choosing just a son of a man. So that's where we left off, and it's dark, and this is not a good end to the story. So let's keep reading. So then, after the Barabbas thing, Pilate took Jesus and had him flogged. And the soldiers wove a crown of thorns. Let's identify these nasty things. And put it on his head. This is just gnarly in itself, especially if you've done gardening and we have our little roses, and man, how often do you get one little prick from a rose and that's hurting. And anytime I'm gardening, I don't know if you guys do that thought too, like, man, they put something like this, it's probably more gnarly than that, into Jesus's head. I'm a little wuss. I can't handle one little knack. And it's like that's being pushed into his head, which is also interesting because, they're probably not wearing gardening gloves. Think of the people who had to make this crown of thorns. They probably got hurt themselves in making it. And they were willing to risk their own pain in order to mock the Son of Man. How relevant is that to us, where we'll even go so far into inflict pain in ourselves to then indulge in our sin? And that's what these guys are doing. They're inflicting their own pain to indulge in sin, to crucify the Lord of glory. So they wove a crown of thorns. They put it on Jesus's head. They dressed him in a purple robe, which, purple is going to be the most expensive of materials in terms of how to make it, crushing all these worms and getting their blood out to dye these things. I mean, this is a big deal. So they're mocking him. They kept coming up saying to him, "Hail, King of the Jews," and striking him on the face. And this is just crazy because they don't realize that this is the King of the Jews and the King of Rome, right? And the King of America and the King of Argentina and all these places. And he does deserve a crown, and he does deserve a purple robe. Yeah, but they're doing this in a mocking way. Pilate went out again and said to them, "Look, I am bringing him out to you to let you know that I find no case against him." So Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and a purple robe. Pilate said to them, "Here is the man." When the chief priests and the police saw him, they shouted, "Crucify him, crucify him," which is obviously going to be a contrast to what we see a week earlier in the Palm Sunday account, where it's Hosanna, right? Instead of shouting a Hosanna, come God now, it's going to be this, crucify him. Pilate said to them, "Take them yourselves and crucify him. I find no case against him." The Jews answered him, "We have a law, and according to that law, he ought to die, because why? Because he has claimed to be the Son of God." And this is going to be taken in a number of different ways. In a sense, all Israel can claim to be the Son of God. So there's nothing wrong with that. Why is this an issue? He's claiming to be the Son of God in a different sort of way. In an illegal sort of sense. Because this is blasphemy. I am the Son of God. I am equal with God. I'm from God. So verses 8 through 12. Now when Pilate heard this, he was more afraid than ever. Which is interesting who knows if he showed it or not, but to be a powerful person, to be afraid of this guy who are killing, like, what is he afraid of? I gave the people what they want. How is this going to be an issue? But he knows something's wrong. And, he found no fault in him. It's almost like, does Pilate get what's going on? I mean, you can't say that Pilate's in the light, but it's almost like he's almost like a Nicodemus type character where it's like, he seems to be asking the right questions, though. What is truth? Remember, we talked about that last week. So where's he at? He answered his headquarters again and asked Jesus, "Where are you from?" Remember, this is the question that we've seen all throughout. What are your origins? But Jesus gave him no answer. I remember hearing one time, a long time ago, how, let me fix this, the true definition of meekness, M-E-E-K, is what you see Jesus in his trial, where he has the ability to defend himself. He could call down angels from heaven, yet he doesn't. He is absorbing the abuse. And he's not pouting. He's not doing sometimes you see in a movie or someone's just like piping mad and they're like, "I'm not going to say nothing, but I'm going to get revenge." I don't think this is the demeanor of Jesus. He is truly meek in the sense of he can do something and he chooses not to. Which is an amazing posture, because that's certainly shameful in the Greco-Roman context of the first century, in a shame and honor culture. And it's just as shameful now. And while we might, I don't know if you ever watch videos on YouTube or whatever of police encounters, and there's like people who will go and like kind of analyze police encounters and which ones are lawful and when did police overstep their boundaries. And oftentimes, we invoke our Fifth Amendment right to not speak. And oftentimes that's happening because it's like, okay, I'm not saying nothing because I know that this guy just committed an unlawful action. I have a lawsuit. I just don't need to say nothing. Like, I'm going to get my payday right now. But that's not what you're seeing here. Like, that's not the mode of Jesus. The mode of Jesus is, I'm going to die for my people because this is what I need to do. Even though these people hate me. And this also reminds me of, do I have that book here? No, it's on a bookshelf somewhere else. One of the many bookshelves. Tim Keller has a great book on forgiveness that came out a couple years ago. And he uses the illustration of forgiveness by saying, forgiveness ultimately is absorbing a debt of another. And so he uses the example of, if you let a friend borrow your car and they smash the car. And obviously in normal instances, you would have car insurance. So like the illustration would break down. Let's assume that car insurance doesn't work in this instance. Okay. Your friend smashes your car and they have no money. They can't pay you back. You're left to either like really only buy a new car yourself because you're not going to get it from anywhere else. And that's the idea, is like you're absorbing or you go without a car, right? But if you decide to buy it, you're absorbing the cost of this person's debt because they can't pay you back. And that's his kind of working illustration for forgiveness, is saying, I'm absorbing the debt of someone else when they cannot pay that, when they've done something to me. And this is just what you already see here. We're going to see at the very end of the cross message of chapter 19, it's this idea of, hey, it's finished, right? But forgiveness is happening throughout this entire thing. Even right here, this is forgiveness. Jesus is modeling forgiveness. Verse 10, Pilate therefore said to him, "Do you refuse to speak to me? Do you not know that I have power to release you and power to crucify you?" Jesus answered him, you would have no power over me unless it had been given to you from above. Therefore, the one who handed me over to you is guilty of a greater sin. So Jesus is, he's once again saying, where are you from? Oh, given to you from above. He's making that connection of, hey, this is where I come from, man. Like that's where I come from. And that's the guy who gave you authority. And so who's guilty? It's the people who handed me over. It's the religious leaders. So verse 12, from then on, Pilate tried to release him, but the Jews cried out, if you release this man, you are no friend of the emperor. Everyone who claims to be a king sets himself against the emperor. So everyone who sets to be a king is meaning Jesus. And no friend of the emperor is going to be a technical term in first century. So, the emperor is going to be Caesar. And so this is going to mean you're not patriotic. You're treasonous. This is what it means to be a good Roman leader here. And so, and there's already been a history of bad leadership in Judea by the Roman governors who have been set over there. So it's one of those things like, well, Pilate has the ability to release him. Why doesn't he just release him? And I think that's the point is because of what had happened basically since the start of Judea, and it had been managed so poorly by Rome, Pilate realizes, man, I can't do this. I can't let this guy go because I've already been seen as this, we have a long history of bad governors. And it's like oftentimes governing bodies, when there's a crisis and then they're trying to put things in place, or maybe they handle that crisis poorly and then something else pops up a little bit later, they oftentimes overreact or don't actually engage in justice because it's, well, we didn't handle that one right. And so we maybe need to come down a little harder on this one, or we need to make an example here to prove that we actually are doing something right. I think that's what's happening with Pilate here. So no friend of emperor. They're basically calling out his allegiance to the emperor. Let's see, where are we going? Verse 13. When Pilate heard these words, he brought Jesus outside and sat on the judge's bench at a place called the Stone Pavement, or in Hebrew, Gabbatha. Now it was the day of preparation for the Passover, and it was about noon. He said to he said to the Jews, "Here is your king." They cried out, away with him, crucify him." Pilate asked them, "Shall I crucify your king?" He must have heard by now about Palm Sunday. Like he knows that there was a group of people like what they were shouting about this guy beforehand. So he's like, some of you guys recognize this as king. So shall I crucify your king? The chief priest answered, "We have no king but the emperor," which is, dude. So this is the chief priests. The chief priests, this is the religious leaders. And who are they demonstrating their loyalty right now? Now remember, they're not living in a democratic republic where they're separating, there's a separation of church and state. The whole messianic expectation of Israel is we want the Messiah to come back so God to establish his kingdom again. They don't think in terms of living in a land where that could be governed by a secular authority. Okay. They don't want Rome there, but they're willing to sell out and get in bed with Rome in order to eliminate Jesus. So this is, you look at this and it's like, this is disgusting, guys. And I don't think we have, in our modern context, politically, parallels can be drawn, but it's not the same at all. Right. So we don't want to say, oh, it's just like this, because there's nothing like this, because we don't live in a theocracy, a theocracy meaning a God governed country. Okay. That's what Israel was supposed to be, is a God run country. God is supposed to be the king, and its constitution, in a sense, to use that language, which is anachronistic, the Constitution is the Ten Commandments. Right. That's their Declaration of Independence. And it's not really independent. They're not independent of anyone. They're to be submissive to God, to Yahweh. So when I say, okay, there's application that could be drawn here, but there's no parallels that can be drawn here in a true sense. So we can say that there's applications in terms of, okay, the chief priests. Well, who are the chief priests nowadays? If we were to look at the application, we don't have chief priests nowadays. Remember, the priestly class is the group of Levites. Well, it's Levites who are able to intercede on behalf of the people. That is their job description. And you don't I don't get to do that if I'm, from the tribe of Reuben or any of these other, or Dan. I don't do that. That's a certain type of job. This is when you become a priest if you're a certain line. And guess what? If you're of the tribe of Levi, you actually don't get land. If you think about it, there's 12 tribes, but there's no land of Levites. When you look at, well, there's the land of Judah, there's a land of, all these other people. The Levites don't get land. Why? Because they are to live amongst the people. That's why you tithe. The whole point of tithing is to pay the priests, because they don't have land, they don't have anything to live on. So you're actually paying them because they live amongst all the people. We actually touch briefly on that. I want to say we record podcasts in advance, but Rob and I talked about this in our podcast on 2 Corinthians sometime within the last few weeks. Shelby could probably talk about it because he listens to those in real time. And I forget when we record what, but I think we talk on the Old Testament background just briefly on that in one of the recent podcasts. So if you want to check out the Determined Truth podcast, we talk about that. So, going back to it, what would be a modern day application? Well, there's no such thing as a chief priest. All Christians are priests now. And that's where Martin Luther came up with that idea of the priesthood of all believers. Jesus is the ultimate priest, and all of us get to go before the ultimate priest. So there's no chief of us around. And so that's where we really need to look at it and say, how often do we say we have no king but the emperor? And whatever that emperor might look like, it literally might be the emperor of a country that has an emperor, or a president, or a king, or whatever sort of ruling figure is set up to govern that land. Remember, we don't want to just think in American context. We want to say, what's the theology of this, and how do we apply it to any Christian across anywhere in the world? So whether it's a dictator or anyone, how often do the priests nowadays, a Christian, do this? Now, we usually don't outrightly and overtly say we have no king but the emperor, because we know better than that, right? There's things that we know to not say. We know to not make the golden calf while Moses is up on the mountain. We know, there's certain things we've just been trained we know not to do. But practically, what do we do? So when I say we overtly don't say these things, but how often do we covertly say these things? How often do we covertly, meaning internally or secretively, we don't say these things, but we actually still do them? What are the things that we have made emperor in place of Jesus? Even though we would never say that, we all do it. And some people do it more than others. And so we need to check ourselves on that. And so, I think everyone should, open up the mirror and look at that to figure out, hey, when do I do that? Because I probably do. And when we need to check ourselves on these sorts of things, whether we're in America or whether we're in a citizen of any country. So anyway, I should probably look at notes at some point. Do I have any notes here? All right. Cool. Let's move on. Verse 16. So they took Jesus. Which for me, that's always like a stop. Like, they took Jesus. Like, man, how defeating is that? Especially if you're one of the disciples or you're one of the people in the light. You got to be thinking, okay, I've seen what this guy could do. I know he's the Messiah. He's going to figure this out. There's no way this ends the way we think it ends. For Star Wars fans, that movie Rogue One came out 10 years ago. And it's like the movie that sets up the first Star Wars movie from 1977. So this is the group that goes in and steals the plans to the Death Star. And these plans are the thing that when you see the first Star Wars movie pop up on the screen that Princess Leia is putting into R2-D2, you know, and Obi-Wan, you're our only hope. Like that's, you know, how did they get these plans? Well, it comes from the movie Rogue One. And Rogue One is super dark because all the people who were able to get these plans, they end up dying. And I remember my nephew at the time, because Mateo wasn't born, so I took my nephew Ace, who was probably, he was probably 7 or something like that at the time whenever it came out. And we're at the movie theater. I remember we're at the Delta Theater. And I'm the uncle who got him into Star Wars because my brother didn't care. And so we're sitting next to each other watching this. And I'd already seen it once, so I knew what to expect. And he turns to me and he's like almost crying at the very end because it's like, it's obvious, like all these dudes are dying. All the good guys are dying. And he's like, Uncle Vinny, the good guys are dying. And it's like, he had no capacity in a Star Wars movie for the good guys to all die. That just doesn't happen. Right. And like, I'm an adult, so like I rationalize these things when I see it. Oh, it's because of this. But when you're 7, you don't have a capacity for that. Good guys don't die in the movies. And unfortunately, we're so callous to things that now we see those types of things. We're like, yeah, good guys do die because we've experienced this present evil age of the world. But a little 7-year-old hasn't experienced those things yet. And so that's rocking his world. He's like almost crying that the good guys are dying because he just doesn't have a capacity for that. Imagine that. Like, imagine being in the crowd right there. So they took Jesus. Like, dude, this isn't not the way it's supposed to be. And we're reading the story and we know the ending. And so it's easy to just skim through this. Like we're just reading the night before Christmas or something. But no, sit in the drama of it as if you are seeing this playing out. This is not the way it's supposed to go. Your life is falling away before your eyes. I went all in on this dude. And if he's going to go out like this, I'm probably going to be next. And what were all those things I experienced? Like, this is where it's good to sit in the narrative. So they took Jesus, and carrying the cross by himself, he went out to what is called the place of the skull, which in Hebrew is called Golgotha. So a couple things to remember here as he heads out to the crucifixion site. Yes, it's in this present evil age, this is an execution. This is bad. This is a crucifixion. But in John's story, remember, this is also his ultimate glorification that we see. This is him being raised up. That language that we hear throughout the gospel where he's going to be raised up. Well, guess what? He's going to be raised up. Not merely in resurrection, but in glory on the cross. This is, he's bearing his own cross, carrying his cross by himself. This would be standard of a criminal pulling out his own cross on his back. It's probably not like we see it in the movies and he's carrying like the full on cross. We would see something like, the cross and we would see Jesus carrying the whole thing. Probably not. What probably is there is just that cross beam. And what they probably have is they probably have those uprights out there already. And so it's probably just that crossbeam that he's carrying out, whether it's just on his back or if they've tied him to it or whatever it is. Crucifixion is interesting. We won't do a whole thing on it right now. And I forget if I have notes. I don't think I have notes on here for you guys. But crucifixion is actually something that was invented by the Assyrians back in about the 6th century BC. So crucifixion is a very old execution practice by this point. Romans kind of did their own thing with it. And they really perfected it. But the Syrians, man, those guys were crazy in terms of how they invented this thing. So obviously in the ancient world, you have roads that exist that you would travel on. And so just like, it's funny, you're driving to Vegas or something and you start seeing billboards that it's like, okay, we're getting closer to Vegas, right? You drive to Disneyland on the 5, all of a sudden you start getting into Orange County or even in LA. Oh, we start seeing Disneyland advertisements. Like you don't see those on the freeway up here, right? You start seeing things that's like, okay, we're getting closer to our destination. What you would do in the Assyrian world, these guys were freaking savage. And so original crucifixion would be like, imagine like a stake, like a piece of wood. Similar to, think of the stakes that you use to, you put next to a tree when you plant a tree. And the stakes they'll put in the ground, and then they'll bind the tree with that stake to make sure it's growing strong and not falling over. So something like that, like a giant pencil, they would put it in the ground, and then they would take someone and they would impale them with the stake, or they would impale them, that way. And these guys were brilliant because they figured out how the human body worked, how the torso worked, and they figured out where the major organs were. So they could do it in a way where they actually avoid puncturing a major organ. So they're like not going through the chest to hit the heart or the lungs and whatnot, but they'll go to the lower side so they could like do the intestines and those sorts of things, the lower groin. And so you have these people sitting like seriously parallel with the ground, and they're just hanging there impaled on the stick. And now they're not going to die for a day or two. Right? This isn't that, and they're just left there. And now, as you're taking your road down to Assyria or from Assyria, it's this is straight up mob boss gangster style images. This is like, do not mess with our people. This is what will happen to you. And not only are you going to die a gruesome death, remember, honor and shame society. Everyone's going to see it. This is going to shame you. You're going to die in shame. Your family is going to be shamed. This is not the way you want to go. And this is one of those things that's going to keep society in order in a horrible kind of way. So the origins of crucifixion are with the Assyrians. And so you would have the crucifixion stake. Now, one thing to just kind of throw out there, we won't spend a lot of time on that. If you ever hang out with a Jehovah's Witness, and this isn't on your notes probably, they say that Jesus was not crucified on a cross in terms of, the T cross. They would say Jesus was crucified on a stake, and they would say a stake, what's the Greek word? Starus, I believe is the word for stake, for crucifixion stake. And it means literally an upright, like a stake, like just a single piece of wood. This is one of the things where there's truth in that, but it also goes to show the utter lack of scholarship on the Jehovah's Witnesses' part. And it's not the individual's faults. This is what they're told. So in Greek, the word, and I think it's starus, it does mean a stake, like a piece of wood, a round piece of wood. That's the original way that it would have been known by, and that's the way in which the Assyrians would crucify people. So a crucifixion in the BC times were just that. However, as devices evolve over time and technology changes, by the time we have the Roman world, they would still use starus for that crucifixion stake. And so it technically means that, but what they know it as is the T-shaped cross. Okay. So it's just used the same word, even though it means something, it has its origin in something else. And so, if you ever have a conversation with a Jehovah's Witness, I don't recommend dying on this hill, but if the conversation does come up, you could let them know, like, that's the origin of the Greek word, but it doesn't necessarily mean that now. And we'll actually explore that a little bit next week in chapter 21, 22, 21. If Jesus or Peter, if you love me, feed my sheep. Even the word love, we'll get into that next week about how Greek words don't have a literal meaning. They oftentimes, the meaning of words change over time. Same thing in our language, and every language has that. So anyway, that's the origins of crucifixion. The Romans, they just absolutely master the art of crucifixion. So now they do hang people on that T-shaped cross. They're going to do a similar thing where when they hang people, it's going to be up there for a couple days. You're usually not dying immediately, and they want you to be up there. And it's a slow death. It's usually death by asphyxiation. You're unable to breathe, and that's how you end up dying. Which is why they would go through and break the legs of people, because then they can't push themselves up. They're just going to be slumping and then running out of oxygen. Things like, is it Discovery Channel or something? I remember years ago they did like a documentary thing on crucifixion. It was really interesting. You'd probably find it on YouTube. I haven't seen it in probably 15 years. But there's even scientific things that are like has nothing to do with the Bible per se, but they're just saying, okay, physiologically, what happens to people in crucifixion? So, where are we at? Now that I went on that rampage. Okay. They took Jesus carrying a cross by himself, Golgotha. There they crucified him, and him with two others, one on each side. So this is calling us back, and I forget if I have it in the notes. Lord, can we be on your right and your left? Remember the disciples asking, they're arguing about hey, you don't want that. You don't want that heat, and it's like, they don't understand, like there's going to be someone else there with Jesus between them. Pilate also had an inscription written and put it on the cross. It read, Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. Many of the Jews read this inscription because the place where Jesus was crucified was near the city, and it was written in Hebrew, Latin, and Greek. That totally makes sense. Latin is going to be the language of Rome. Hebrew is going to be it's going to be the temple language of the Jews. They're going to be speaking Aramaic in their common tongue. Aramaic is a sister language of Hebrew. They share the same alphabet, but it's not the same language. And then Greek is the universal language, thanks to Alexander the Great. And so everyone has to know Greek to do trade or anything. So this is written in that language. Then the chief priests of the Jews said to Pilate, "Do not write the King of the Jews, but this man said, I am King of the Jews." So it's funny, man. Like, these guys get what they want, and they're still getting a little pissy because, like, he's not being crucified and he's given too much glory. They're acknowledging this is who he is, but we don't even want to acknowledge it now. Pilate answered, "What I have written, I have written." When the soldiers had crucified Jesus, they took his clothes and divided them into 4 parts, one for each soldier. They also took his tunic. Now the tunic was seamless, which means it's super expensive, woven in one piece from the top. So they said to one another, "Let us not tear it, but cast lots for it to see who gets it." This was to fulfill what the scripture says. They divided my clothes among themselves, and for my clothing they cast lots. And that is what the soldiers did. Watch that phrase there. That just haunts me every time I read it. Like, it says this thing, and it's like, yeah, and that's what they did. It's like, oh my gosh. Like, could you just imagine, like, bargaining on people's stuff? Like, you see that in World War II movies. You see, like in Band of Brothers, and the parachuters are there, or they go through somewhere, and it's like, all right, all these dead soldiers are here. Grab some ammo, grab some stuff. They might have, like, supplies, but they're doing that out of necessity, right? Can you imagine just like, dude, we're killing this guy right now. Like, who wants his stuff? And like right in front of him, you're just like taking his stuff. Like, the dehumanization of this is just absolutely awful. It says to fulfill the scriptures. This is definitely something that we see in Psalm 22. However, we also need to be careful, and we probably would spend more time on this in a different study. We oftentimes talk of the prophecies of Jesus in the Old Testament, and there certainly are prophecies of Jesus, but don't think of prophecies as things that everyone had like this bingo card. Like, that's the way I kind of grew up thinking, like, oh, here's the bingo card of Jesus prophecy or Messiah prophecies. Which ones are we writing off the list? It's prophetic in the sense of it's the Old Testament revealing Jesus in a way that no one's going to be thinking of. No one's like thinking the Messiah is going to have his clothes divided. Like, they're not thinking of that. Even Psalm 22, my God, why have you forsaken me? We could say that's it's prophetic in a sense, but not in the sense that they're assuming that the Messiah is going to die. Remember, the Messiah is not going to die. He's not dying. So why would he claim that the Lord is forsaking him? Okay. So we got to remember, we don't mean these prophecies in terms of like a bingo card prophecy that everyone's waiting for these things to happen. It really is more in a Christological reading of the Old Testament and how the Old Testament story captures Jesus. Where are we at? 25. I'm just trying to see. This is interesting too. I have this in the notes. In the movies especially, remember, always think to yourself when you're reading especially popular Bible stories, what is actually the Bible story and what's Hollywood? What's Cecil B. DeMille and what is actually Moses? Right? Like, what is Jesus and what is Mel Gibson? right? We want to think about these things. So even the idea of standing by the cross, and I remember growing up, it's like you have these views of like these dudes that are like way up, like stilts, like it is so high. No, these guys are probably just a foot off the ground. Like crucifixion isn't this thing that everyone's looking up at. It's right there. Okay, I mean, wood is expensive. They're not dealing with wenches and pulleys and those sorts of things. Like they have to do this themselves. They're going to make this easy and reproducible. And so, and I think this even humanizes it even more. It's grand to look at something that's way up there and wow, you're being crucified way up there with the birds. Imagine him standing there and you can make eye contact because your faces are almost at the same level. Like if you've never thought of it in that terms, how does that just shift your image of Good Friday? Where you're not looking up at this Jesus that's way up there. You could go up to him and smell his breath, right? Or you're close enough where you could still smell the ointment, that pure nard that Mary had just anointed him with just a couple days before. Like think of that image, man. So they're right there. The tall kind of cross, that's really like a European art style depiction of it. It's probably not what was actually happening. And I even have notes in there, like Josephus, the Jewish historian, he talks about seeing people he knew on crosses and they'd be there for days and you could have conversations with them as they're dying. Like the humanization of this, don't think of this as, this isn't like the sad music being played in the background and the slow-mo of people mocking them. And this is a real thing, a real awkward, horrible thing. Verse 25, the second part of 25. Meanwhile, standing near the cross of Jesus were his mother and his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. So you got these ladies together. Which, think of the role of women in all the Gospels, but in the role of women in John's Gospel specifically, because we've seen all kinds of women, whether they be Jew or Samaritan, which is it's crazy. And the women are always presented in the positive light. Religious leaders blew it. Jewish leaders blew it. Obviously, Gentile leaders blow it. The disciples blow it. Who never blows it? The women. And we'll even see this next week in the resurrection. Like they're such an integral part to the story. I'm trying to see. No, I don't have that book here. There's a book I was going to recommend, and I don't see it here, and I forget the name of it, but I would know the cover, so I will not talk about that. So moving on. When Jesus saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved, probably John, standing beside her, he said to his mother, "Woman, here is your son." Then he said to the disciple, "Here is your mother." And from that hour, the disciple took her into his own home. This is probably indicating, and this is an argument from silence, Joseph's nowhere to be found. So Joseph is probably dead. Mary is most likely a widow at this point. And it would be the responsibility of the oldest son to care for mom in this case. So in this instance, we know that Jesus has other brothers and sisters, even from the Gospel of John. They're up in Galilee and they're like, dude, you're crazy. But who is your mother? Who is your brother? Like Jesus even redefines family, and he's empowering John, the disciple who he loved, to take care of mom. And so this would be, like I said, this should go to the next oldest son, and instead it's going to one of his followers. And John's a young guy at this point, which is really interesting. Where are we at? Just want to make sure I'm not skipping notes. Yeah. 28. After this, when Jesus knew that all was now finished, he said, in order to fulfill the scripture, "I am thirsty." Which is, think about this. Don't think, we try to solve this in a empirical, modernized sense, like, oh, of course he's thirsty, and they're even going to come, okay, there's hyssop and there's wine, there's all this stuff. No. What is the role of water in the Gospel of John? Think of the themes that Jesus is, he's dealing with the theme of water here. He's not just talking about his physical need. He's reintroducing that theme of water, the thing that gives life. And who is the true living? Isn't that ironic? He is the source of living water in which Samaritan woman, you'll never need to drink again. And he's saying, I'm thirsty. So, verse 29, a jar full of sour wine was standing there. So they put a sponge full of the wine on a branch of hyssop and held it to his mouth. When Jesus received the wine, he said, "It is finished." Then he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. Hyssop is going to have Exodus imagery. This is what's used to paint the blood over the door, over the Passover. And so once again, it's John wanting us to recall that sort of imagery, that Old Testament imagery. Keep it on notes. It is finished. This is just such a powerful phrase here. It's 3 words translated in English. It's 1 word in Greek, tetelestai. And it's in the perfect tense, we'll call it, meaning it's something that is the effects are going to be felt now. So it's not like I am finished eating, where like I'm finished eating, but I'm going to be hungry again at some point, right? I'm finished eating dinner, but I know I'm going to have breakfast because my tummy will be making noises, at 7 a.m. It's finished, and it's final finished. It's done. It's complete. Okay. It's in the same way a team finishes the season, right? And so my teams finish the season on the last day of the regular season. The regular season is when the schedule is put out, and that week, 17 in the NFL, or that game 162. My teams they finish then. They're just done, and it's over. It's temporarily over, and we're going to start up again in a couple months. Hold, please. Hey, sir.
Good night.
Go ahead.
At first, I wasn't going to say good night,
Why not?
but now I am.
Oh, thank you.
Bye.
Do you want to say goodnight to the people?
Bye.
All right. Love you, bud. Close the door.
Minecraft jammies.
Oh, Minecraft jammies. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. He saw your Minecraft jammies. Can you close the door, bud? The whole way. Hey. Now close it. Love you. So it's the laugh, man. When's the point where his laugh isn't cute anymore? It's just like, dude, shut up. You're annoying. It's probably the same time where right now his butt's cute, and then it's like, oh, this thing's gonna get hairy and pimply in a while, right? like Shelby, you got a little guy, so you know what I'm talking about. And
I know exactly what you're talking about.
I'm
just trying to think, like, what age will it be annoying?
It's gonna be nasty. Yeah. Anyway, back to serious things. How my sports teams suck. So it's completed in terms of, or it's finished in terms of the season is finished, and now we wait for it to start over again, so we're not disappointed. Jesus, the way he's using this term, this is the completed, or if the finished, that the team who wins the Super Bowl says. The goal, not just of playing 162 games or 17 games in the NFL. I've accomplished what I've wanted, to win the championship, winning the Super Bowl, winning the World Series, win the NBA Finals, those things. This is the type of finished Jesus is talking about. It's like the goal is finished. And so he's not merely saying my life is finished. No, something else is complete. Tetelestai. It's perfectly complete. And then it says, then he bowed his head and what? Gave up his spirit. This probably isn't the best translation of this term. I have in there the Synoptics account. It's yielded up his spirit, breathed his last, or ways it's said. This is a standard Greek way of describing death, but this is also very passive, right? He gave up his spirit. It's like, like surrendering your passport or something like that, where it's like, dude, I'm not choosing to do this, but under threat of arrest. I'm going to do this thing. I'm giving it up, that kind of way. That's not what's happening here. It's handing it over, right? It's more active. No, take this. Here's my thing. And, in a way like handing over a tradition to the family. This is more what it emphasizes what's happening more. Think about it once again, calling back, like what we try to do every week. Where have we seen this before? John chapter 2. You see this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. But he was talking about the temple of his body. He gives it up, and he has the power to raise it up as well. This isn't a passive thing that's happening here. Verse 31. Since it was the day of preparation, meaning preparing for Sabbath. So this is Friday. And remember, a time in Jewish culture is sundown to sun up.
Do you mind if I get some paper?
Please hurry up.
Okay.
So sundown. So Sabbath begins Friday night at sundown. Sabbath ends Saturday night at nighttime, basically. So that's the way days work in the world. Did you close the thing?
Yes.
Thanks, bud. Close the door. Hey. All right. You gonna draw something good? Mm-hmm. Nice. So the day of preparation means we're preparing for Sabbath, and not that, like, how often do you throw a party and you're like, oh, we have till tonight because the party happens tomorrow. No, they need to be done by the time it gets dark. And so it's the day of preparation. We're preparing all day Friday for Friday night to happen. And so the Jews did not want the bodies left on the cross during the Sabbath, especially because the Sabbath was a day of great solemnity. So this is a thing where if you're a Gentile, they just leave them up. But this is one of those things where the Roman leaders would give a special dispensation to allow them, because it goes with their religious practices. Fine, we'll let you get them, we'll let you to not keep them over the weekend. So they asked Pilate to have the legs of the crucified men broken and the bodies removed. Remember, we said that's significant because the only thing keeping them alive right now is keeping them, pushing themselves up enough to be able to catch some breath, and then they would sink down. So the soldiers came and broke the legs of the first and of the other who had been crucified with him. But when they came to Jesus and saw that he was already dead, they did not break his legs. Instead, one of the soldiers pierced his side with a spear, and at once blood and water came out. He who saw this has testified so that you may also believe. Remember, these are like, who's giving credible witnesses? And remember, the goal of John's gospel is to believe. His testimony is true, and he knows that he tells the truth, which means that's probably John's testimony that we're talking about. These things occurred so that the scripture might be fulfilled. None of his bones shall be broken. Once again, not fulfilled in a prophetic bingo card kind of way, but being fulfilled in the Old Testament story is talking about Jesus. And we see this there. This also highlights Passover lamb imagery once again. Of that's what you would do with that perfect, healthy Passover lamb. Because you don't break the legs of the Passover lamb. You need to keep them pure. Let's see. There we go, 37. And again, another passage of scripture says, they will look on the one whom they have pierced. So obviously the piercing coming from this as well. Let's see. On the surface, this just seems like a way to confirm that Jesus is dead, right? Oh, we don't have to break his legs. This is a lot easier than breaking someone's legs, right? Bam, just stab him real quick. A naturalistic explanation, which we often try to do for Bible stories. And this is another one of those things. And this is when we know when we live in a science-minded, modernistic mindset. And when I say modernism, I mean like the classical definition of modernism, cultures that are trying to prove things by scientific and rational thought. We try to read Bible stories and figure out the scientific explanation of how these can happen. We know that Jonah in the whale is true because it can be proved that so-and-so can survive. There is this one thing. Or we know that the gardens, these are just things I've heard. I don't know if they're actually true or not. But well-meaning Christians have told me. We know that the garden story is true, that the serpent has to slither now because they have markings of where they formerly had legs. And so that proves that Genesis 3 is true. It's like we do these sort of things. And here's the thing. The point is miracles happen for a reason. The point of a miracle is there is no naturalistic explanation for why this sort of thing happened. Okay. It's not that we know that the Red Sea story, the parting of the sea and the people crossing through the sea is true because, they actually found this one area in which they could cross. Or they, these things are trying to debunk, the plagues of Egypt and all that. And oftentimes Christians are embarrassed of miracles in the Bible. And so they think that, we found that these things can actually be proven to be true to happen. I think it makes us feel better for them. It's like, see, we're not crazy. Science can explain it. The point of a miracle is that science doesn't explain this. The point of a miracle is that it's not reproducible. Remember, science tests things and said, okay, can we reproduce that this is a thing? That's the point. You cannot reproduce someone surviving in the belly of a fish for 3 days. Like that's not supposed to happen. And it only happens by miraculous decree and involvement. And so, yes, sometimes you might have a scientific explanation for things. So I'm not saying avoid that. I'm just saying, let's not be so embarrassed of what God does and try to be so quick to explain how it can happen scientifically and see, therefore that's authenticating the Bible. No, it's not. Like maybe it's just something miraculous that happened. You don't need to authenticate the Bible through science, because ultimately, if you are, what that means is science is your highest standard of faith. And there, I can only prove what I believe based on science. So science is your authority. The Bible is not. So that's a whole other class. Maybe we'll get into another time. But yeah, you can have fluid forming around the heart and, especially from all the trauma that he had been experiencing as a body. But that's not the point. The point is what does water look like through John's gospel? Remember, John's audience isn't thinking in naturalistic, anatomic type ways. They're not saying, of course water would come out because of an enlarged heart and blah, blah, blah. No, water is flowing from the side of the man who is the source of living water. Like, think theologically. What is John trying to communicate here? And John does this constantly. He gives something that should be obvious, but he's trying to communicate below the surface. And he even does this in the death of Jesus. So let's not.
I wonder where he learned that from.
Yeah, seriously. But seriously, I'm not an anti-science guy at all. And I'm not even like, if we were to do a study on Genesis 1-6, like I don't dogmatically hold to a view one way or another, but I am so not opposed to the age of the earth being 4 billion years old. Like I'm not anti-science in any kind of stretch of the imagination. So this isn't like, are you for science or against it? It's just saying we're looking at the Bible. And so we're looking at theology. We're looking at what are the biblical writers trying to communicate in the world that would have made sense to them. And it's probably not a scientific thing that they're trying to communicate. That scientific thing might be true, but that's not the point of the passage. So Gary Burge and his commentary, and like I said, I pulled a lot from Gary Burge through his. I would really recommend his. Don't fall. Well, that's not good. That was a. That was almost dangerous. He has there's the commentary series, the NIV application commentary series. I probably linked to this on the website. This is an older series that came out in the late 90s. But his commentary on this is really good. And so, like this is one of the sources that I pulled a lot from the study on. Burge also had this book, Jesus and the Jewish Festivals, which I pulled a lot from the earlier part. It's out of print, but you could buy the Kindle version still. Highly recommend those. I mean, I obviously pulled from stuff from other places as well, but I think Burge just does a great job of his eyes on the gospel are fantastic. So he says, living water loosed at the cross is flowing out from the cross. From the cross, we have a fountain pouring out, giving life to the world. And I just think that's just a beautiful description in capturing so much of what we've been seeing for chapters and chapters. It's kind of like the climax of all this water theme that we've seen. So I would even encourage you again, after we're done with the study in a couple weeks, sometimes when you spend months and months in a book of the Bible, you kind of want to move on. Spend time over the holidays, read through John again, and just maybe even note themes. I'm just going to read it and look for water themes, and maybe read it again. I'm going to read it and look for light, dark themes. Or maybe, look at it in that way and see how you could understand the gospel again. What time is it? Verse 38. After these things, Joseph of Arimathea, who was a disciple of Jesus, which is interesting, we don't see him listed as one of the 12. And it's because Jesus didn't merely have 12 disciples. He had multiple disciples. But why is the number 12 significant? There was 12 tribes of Israel, 12 disciples of Jesus. It's demonstrating, this represents the people of God. Once again, it's a symbolic number. So many symbolic things in the Gospels. Who was a disciple of Jesus, though a secret one, because of his fear of the Jews, asked Pilate to let him take away the body of Jesus. Pilate gave him permission, so he came and removed Jesus' body. Nicodemus, remember we've met him, who had at first come to Jesus by night, also came, bringing a mixture of myrrh and aloes, weighing about 100 pounds. He brought some expensive stuff, right? And what's this doing? It's saying he's recognizing who Jesus is. While he was probably in the dark in chapter 3, through the course of Jesus's ministry, he's like, nope, I recognize it, which is significant. He's recognizing it even in his hour of death. This is the time where you'd want to give up on it. Like, all right, we went all in on him. Let's abandon it. I don't want to be the last rat off a sinking ship. This is when you see the people who didn't know if they were in the light. Oh, we're actually coming into this. Joseph of Arimathea doing the same thing. They took the body of Jesus and wrapped it in spices, in linen cloths, according to the burial custom of the Jews. Now there was a garden. Well, let's actually stop here. So just a couple of cultural things to look at. Joseph of Arimathea, we see in Mark and Luke's Gospels, a member of the Sanhedrin. So he's actually a significant player. How much division does this cause? You have Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus both basically crossing the picket line. Talk about scabs, right? To use a modern vernacular. You have all these chief priests, you have the religious leaders, the Sanhedrin, who just got this guy killed. And you have two of these guys who are the elite people in Israel saying, what you guys did, I'm now going to go and show him respect. Like they know that this is causing problems for them when the other side has seemingly just won. What happens the next time the Sanhedrin meets? How are they going to be received? But that's what being a disciple means. That's what being in the light means. You would also, the way you would prepare for burial, our modern idea of burial, even if when we lose someone, cremation aside, burial is typically the thing that happens after the funeral, right? So, grandma dies. We need to plan out the funeral. Next week, we're going to have the funeral. I'm not trying to be trite on this, but she might be kept in a facility, in a refrigerator for a while. She's brought out. We have that thing, maybe open casket, and then we do the ceremony. We take her to the facility, and then we have the burial, which is where she's lowered in the ground, and that's her eternal dwelling place, physically. We don't want to think of burial in that kind of way in the Jewish world. You don't have enough land. You don't have plots and graveyards in the way that you do in the modern world. So what you're going to do is you're going to have, and I think we talked about this in the chapter on Lazarus being raised, but just as a reminder, you're going to have caves in which you're going to carve out benches and even like almost beds in these things. Think of the worst retreat center you've ever thought of. And that's what these burial tombs look like. So you're going to carve out these flat beds. And then you're going to have a section where you could stack all the boxes. You wrap the body in linens like this. You put spices on it and smelly things. Why? Because decomposition stinks. The King James version of the Lazarus account actually says he stinketh of Lazarus. It'd been 4 days. He got gnarly, right? So you're going to do this. You're going to keep the body in there. You let it sit for a year to decompose, and then you come back, you collect the bones, you put the bones in a box. Was it a mausoleum? And then you put the box in basically a shelf with all the other boxes of whoever lives in that tomb. And so this is what they're expecting that's going to happen. So the burial process takes up a year to go through this. Which, I mean, we just think about this. These people die. Like, life expectancy is much shorter in the ancient world. Mortality rates are much higher. Once again, just to put ourselves in the mind of these stories, because we've been so flannel graphed by these things. This job sucks. You're carrying a dead body and you're bringing him into a tomb, which means there's probably other dead, decomposing bodies in this tomb. People loved ones and people that you know are sitting there decomposing. Who knows what kind of animals are in here gnawing away at them, right? Let's not PG this thing. Like, get in the mindset of the story. And you're not only seeing the trauma of experiencing who you thought was the Messiah dying, just the trauma of experiencing death, right? So now they're going in there and they're finding, okay, where are we going to put him? Because this guy's over here, this guy's over here. You find a place to lay the body down. And you're leaving. I mean, this isn't this glorious, clean tomb that is sanitary. This is a pretty gnarly, nasty, stinky place. So this is what they're doing. So, and we got to get this done before the Sabbath. Now there was a garden in the place where he was crucified. And in the garden, there was a new tomb in which no one had ever been laid. So obviously, this is going to be different for him. And so because it was the Jewish day of preparation and the tomb was nearby, they laid Jesus down. Check this out. What do we hear? What are we thinking about when we hear garden? Why would John include this whole part? Like, this doesn't shed any light on the story that it was nearby or anything like that. What actually makes this known? Or what makes this significant? What imagery, what biblical imagery should we be picking up on right here? Eden. Who lived in the garden? Adam and Eve. Guess what? Who is Jesus? The true Adam.
Yeah.
Right? And so guess what? He's going to have new life when we know that. And remember, John's readers know that, but John knows his readers know the story already. So same thing, we should be hearing this and saying, oh, when he has new life on Sunday, he's coming out of the garden and living in the garden just like Adam did. But this time it's different. He's a different kind of Adam, which obviously Paul picks up on this in Romans, right? So they lied, and that's it, right? Oh, we're done. So so much Old Testament imagery that we're seeing here that we got to remember. And I've said this before, and I'll say it again, and I'm first to stand in this line. As Gentile Christians, we usually don't know our New Testaments well enough to identify Old Testament imagery. And there's a lot that I left out. There's some that I knew about. It's like, okay, I'm leaving that out. There's a lot of Ezekiel language that we see in the crucifixion. There's a lot that we're leaving off the table, but this is stuff that, there's stories in the New Testament that we just know, and we could even finish off the phrases. We would know the New Testament better if we knew our Old Testaments in the same way. And what's really interesting is some of the best New Testament scholars are people who started off as Old Testament scholars, and then they decided to jump into the New Testament, and they bring this wealth of Old Testament information with them. And those are the ones that are just a delight to read. So where are we left at? We're left now, and this has to wait 2 weeks, because remember, we're not going to meet next Tuesday night, where we'll have Thanksgiving week off. So instead of having to wait 3 days, we're waiting 14 days. But think of the despair that the people are experiencing, the trauma of the death they've experienced. I mean, that alone is traumatic. Even if you don't know the guy, how traumatic is that? And unfortunately, we live in a world where people get used to that. And so we don't want to say, oh, they saw it all the time, so it was no big deal. And oftentimes I rationalize that. I even look at what's happening in other parts of the world, whether it's in Africa, whether it's in Israel, Palestine, Ukraine. It's like, you just have people who are used to this sort of thing. If you're used to that, how callous is your soul? If that's just something that doesn't bother you. or you're not. I experienced this when I used to teach music, and I taught drums for a long time. There was 2 days a week I taught in Oakland at the Oakland Military Institute. This is in 2004, 2005. Mondays and Wednesdays I went to Oakland. Tuesdays and Thursdays I went to Amador Valley and Pleasanton. 30-minute drive over the hill, over the 580, two completely different continents, right? The fact that, trauma for my Pleasanton kids and obstacles in life where, hey, Vinny, I can't be at summer practices in the month of June because our family is going to Italy. Real life example of why a kid couldn't attend summer practices. In Oakland, it was, hey, Vinny, Michael isn't here today. He got stabbed on the bus. Right. And I think this was in the junior high group. And here's the thing. He didn't say, like, if that happened in Pleasanton, the whole city's shutting down and they're having a news conference and we're probably having a crisis center set up on school campus. I know that because we do this at Freedom High School when I worked there. Hey, we're shutting down the counseling teams to get together. We're going to do this crisis stuff, provide a safe place, people to talk about it. Yeah, we just call that Monday. The fact that they're used to violence and we're like, they're just used to that sort of thing. We should never have that mindset towards people who live, whether it's in Oakland, whether it's people who, they just grew up on Sycamore. They're used to gunshots ringing out, where we freak out over fireworks in Oakley. They're people made in the image of God, right? And the fact that it's heartbreaking, whether it's them or we think of Palestinian children or Ukrainian children, whoever, it's like we should be heartbroken if our mindset goes to, they're just used to that sort of thing. That's the sign of a broken world. And so same thing here. We don't want to say, these people are just used to death. Well, if they are, oh my gosh, how even more heartbreaking is that? And so what are the people experiencing? The utter loss. I don't even know what to compare it to, but I know that in 2008, 9, 10, 11, when the recession happened and we have this financial crisis, like people are losing their livelihood. We lost our home. We bought our home in 2006. First home we bought right off of Empire and Neroli. If you've ever been to Jeff Weekly's house, it was literally like 5 houses down from where he's at. Bought our first home in 2006 at $486,000. All our money went to it right when we got married. We sold at short sale at $161,000. Like, we were lucky in the sense that we were like 30 years old when this happened. We had family to help support us. We could still get our life going, and we've been able to bounce back and that sort of thing. How many people were in our situation and they were 60 or 70 and now they're done? There's no way to bounce back. And I know a couple people like that. Or the stock market crashes and like what they thought they were going to have in a nest egg is gone. Imagine that in Jesus, but in the King of the universe, the Messiah who's going to come and sit on David's throne and set God's people free. When that happens, that's worse than money. And this is the longest weekend of these people's lives. You got to think the Sabbath, which is remembering a Passover type day. How sorrowful is that day? We've all experienced that because we've all experienced that loss. Imagine it on this level. And I think sitting in it makes Easter morning that much better. But we don't want to, we like to skip past the hard stuff in life. So sometimes it's good to sit on it for a couple weeks. And with that being said, any thoughts or questions or reflections or anything on the text or anything in life? Maybe not anything in life. Some things keep to yourself.
One of the things that I was thinking of when we were going through this is the crucifixion of Jesus is not an accident. And Jesus is not accidentally or by mere circumstance being crucified. He's actively pursuing giving himself up in this. And one of the things that kind of pointed that out to me when we were going through this is other prisoners, while they're being crucified, are fighting and struggling to stand up on those legs. and are trying to actively catch their breath, as you're saying, like they're trying to stand up and catch their breath. And Jesus, in my brain, the way that this is working out is Jesus dies before the other two prisoners, and quickly.
Yep.
He doesn't
Yes.
agonize through the weekend. Yes, he had gone through some physical trauma, but he's not actively fighting against the crucifixion of himself. He's willingly and actively giving himself up, handing it over. From the point of not speaking to Pilate and defending himself to not struggling and trying to fight for the life here. He's giving his life up all the way to the end.
It's interesting because for the first time, as you're saying that, Shelby, I'm thinking, I think it was when my grandma had her stroke. I don't want to be telling this story wrong, but over the weekend we knew that she wasn't going to recover from it, and so by Sunday or Monday, they put her in comfort care, I think is what it's called. So she's not on anything, and she's just in a room, and family could come and visit. It was at John Muir in Walnut Creek, and I remember. I think this is what I don't think I'm making this up. So I don't think I am, but I think my mom told me that the nurse said to my mom, "Hey, sometimes people need permission to die," and so even just let her know it's okay. Sorry, give me a second. But like my mom did that, and then they went off to have lunch. And when they came back, that's when she was dead. And so you got to think of that in Jesus. It's the same way, like, and I'm not trying to get inside the psychology of Jesus, but with that giving up, it's like he didn't need permission to go through that. And so he wasn't fighting it. Like what you're saying, Shelby, he gave himself up.
Yeah.
And so that's why it probably didn't take as long, where those criminals, they're hanging on for dear life. We don't want to dehumanize, and we don't want to say, well, of course he did. He's Jesus and he's God and he just does that.
No, yeah.
Hypostatic union, he's 100% man as well. And so he's going to be fighting that urge to hold on. But what does he say? I know what love looks like, is to give up my life for a friend. Therefore, you could take it.
Yeah, and it's like the thing that just keeps popping in my head is just like it's active. He's not passively being crucified. Like every step of the way, he's like actively showing us what love looks like and how much he loves us, and that he's literally like not fighting. He's carrying the cross. He's not like it doesn't, and none of the gospel accounts show any like resistance. Like if I think about myself in this position, I'm like probably fighting tooth and nail to just be like, no, this is wrong. I haven't done anything wrong. Just trying to justify myself to stop myself from having this happen. But Jesus is actively knows his mission. And he's even said so to the disciples. Like, I am active. This is literally my cross to bear. Like, this is literally like what I'm here for. This is my purpose. Is to do this. And if I don't do this, like, get behind me, Satan, because if I don't do this, like, you don't understand what doesn't happen, right? So I don't know. It just, for some reason, that it just kind of, after reading the gospel, you can read the gospel accounts of the crucifixion so many times, and you can kind of become callous. Like, we probably have all just kind of skimmed through this, trying to read through it real fast, but like stopping and just reading it again and again and seeing like the active pursuit of Jesus's justification of all of us. It's just crazy.
Yep. Great insight, Shelby. Thanks, bud. Yeah. Anyone else got anything to add? No. Okay. Well, like I said, next week off. I hope you guys all have a great holiday, whatever you do. I don't know if any of you guys are traveling, but be safe if you do. Have fun. If you're not traveling, if you're not spending time with anyone, hopefully you are, and hopefully someone's welcoming you in. Excuse me. We'll be back, man, in freaking December. That's crazy, man. Yeah. So December the 3rd, 2 weeks from tonight will be our last night. We'll finish up. We'll go through, obviously, chapters 20 and 21. And yeah, we'll do that.
How do we have a potluck at the last class?
Let's see. Everyone bring your dinner and we'll just like eat at our desks,
There
I
you go.
guess.
There you go.
Two potluck.
It's so good. So there you go. So cool. Hey, let's pray and get out of here. And then Nancy, please keep us up to date on what's happening with Jim. Okay. Yeah. Father, thank you for sending your son to be an example in the truest sense, not just setting an example, but being an example. Allow us to be that in our own lives. Allow us to practice meekness, to give ourselves up in a way, even when we know we shouldn't be doing it and it's unjust. Allow us to be those people who absorb the debts of others, to become forgiveness people, to not skid and ignore unrighteousness, but to do it in a Jesus kind of way. So we long for a day when you make all things right. And so come, Lord Jesus, come quickly. But be with us as we navigate this life now. And just a prayer for Jim as he heads into surgery in a week from now. We pray this in the name of Jesus. Amen.
Amen.
All right, friends. Hope you all have a great
Amen.
couple weeks, and I'll see you in a couple weeks.
Thanksgiving.
Happy
Yep.
Thanksgiving.
Happy
Happy
Thanksgiving,
Thanksgiving,
guys.
everybody.
All right. See you later.